It was the kind of night where the desert air felt heavier than usual, and the sky above Route 66 was choked with clouds that hid the stars Jack Malone had been driving west for what felt like forever. His '67 Mustang humming along the cracked old highway, with nothing but static on the radio and the rhythmic thump of tires hitting potholes to keep him company. He hadn't planned to stop, but when he spotted the flickering neon sign of a lonely diner up ahead, he figured it wouldn't hurt to stretch his legs. The place looked like it had been frozen in time, a relic from the golden age of road trips with chrome panels and red vinyl seats. Jack parked his car under a broken street lamp and stepped inside, where the smell of burnt coffee and grease hit him like a wave. There was only one other customer, a man in a faded leather jacket sitting at the counter, his face hidden beneath the brim of a battered hat. Jack nodded to him, but got no response, so he slid into a booth by the window and waited for the waitress. She appeared like a ghost, tired eyes, dark circles, a name tag that said Marge. But her voice was kind as she poured him a cup of coffee and asked, what brought him out of this way? Jack just shrugged, said he was chasing sunsets or maybe running from something, he wasn't sure anymore. That's when the stranger at the counter finally spoke, his voice low like the rumble of distant thunder. He said, "If you're heading west, son, you might want to turn back. There's something out there tonight, something you don't want to meet." Jack raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything at first, figuring the guy was drunk or just looking to scare a weary traveler. But there was something about the way he said it that planted a seed of unease deep in Jack's gut. The stranger turned slightly, and Jack could see part of his face under the hat's shadow. Deep scars ran along his cheek like claw marks, and his eyes were sharp with the kind of look you see in men who've seen too much. "You don't believe me," he said. More a statement than a question. Jack smirked, said he wasn't in the mood for ghost stories. The stranger leaned back, took a slow sip of his coffee, and said, "All right then, how about this? I'll bet you $50 you don't make it to the next town tonight, not without turning around." Jack laughed, said he'd take that bet, he could use an easy 50. The stranger nodded and slid a crumpled 50 onto the counter. Marge shook her head, muttered something about fools and their money, and went back to wiping down the counter. Jack tossed a 20 on the table for the coffee, grabbed his keys, and headed out the door. The Mustang roared to life, and he glanced once in the rearview mirror, saw the stranger watching him from the window, eyes glinting in the dark. The clouds overhead had thickened, and the night seemed darker than it had any right to be. But Jack told himself it was just a story, just some drifter's way of passing the time. He hit the gas, and the diner's neon faded behind him, swallowed by the night. The highway stretched on endlessly, two narrow lanes of cracked asphalt bordered by dry grass and the occasional twisted Joshua tree. Jack turned up the radio hoping for music, but all he got was static that rose and fell like the sound of waves on a distant shore. The air grew colder, and he rolled up the window, his breath fogging the glass. He kept driving, but something felt wrong. The miles didn't seem to be passing the way they should. He checked the odometer, but it was stuck at the same number it had been when he left the diner. The road ahead started to look strange. The stripes on the pavement faded, then vanished altogether, and the terrain began to change subtly, the familiar desert giving way to strange rock formations that glowed faintly under the weak moonlight. Jack felt his grip tighten on the wheel as the Mustang's headlights picked out shapes along the roadside, things that looked like they might have been trees once, but now stood twisted and blackened like they'd been burned in some ancient fire. Then he saw a sign, bent and rusted, half buried in the sand. It said, "Welcome to Gray Pines." But there was no town in sight, no lights, no buildings, just more empty road. Stretching into the dark, Jack's pulse quickened as he realized he hadn't seen another car in over an hour, maybe longer. He thought about turning back, but pride, or maybe stubbornness, kept his foot on the gas. Without warning, the fog rolled in thick and unnatural, swallowing the road and the world around it, until Jack could barely see the hood of his car. He slowed down, squinting into the swirling mist, the Mustang's engine growling low as if it too sensed the wrongness of this place. Shapes moved in. Then the fog. Tall and thin, like figures watching from just beyond sight. Jack's heart pounded as he caught glimpses of them shifting between the shadows, their outlines flickering like bad reception on an old TV. Then, something darted across the road in front of him so fast he couldn't make it out, but he heard the thud as it hit the car and the screech of metal on metal. The Mustang skidded and Jack fought the wheel, bringing it to a stop on the side of the road, his hands shaking. He got out, flashlight in hand, and stepped into the cold silence. The fog muffled every sound, and the world felt impossibly still. He walked around the car expecting to see a coyote, or maybe a deer, but there was nothing. No blood. No body, just long scratches along the side of the car like something with claws had raked it as it passed. Jack felt the weight of the darkness pressing in, and he realized how far he was from anything familiar. He jumped back into the car, locked the doors, and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The radio crackled to life for just a second, and a voice whispered his name before the static returned, louder than before. Filling the cabin with its hiss, Jack hit the gas, determined to get out of whatever nightmare he'd stumbled into, but the fog only grew thicker, and the road more treacherous. Jack drove on until the Mustang was nearly out of gas, the needle hovering over empty. The road twisted tighter, and the fog began to break in patches, revealing a faint glow on the horizon, like the lights of a town or maybe something far worse. Jack pushed forward, drawn by that glow, until the shapes of ruined buildings came into view. Gray pines, or what was left of it, burnt out, husks of houses, shattered windows, doors hanging loose like broken jaws, and in the center of town, a single light burned. In what might have been a church, once Jack parked, stepped out, and felt the crunch of glass under his boots. He made his way to the building, drawn by that lone light, the air around him cold and heavy. Inside, he found candles burning on an altar and walls covered in strange symbols drawn in ash and what looked like dried blood. A figure stood there, cloaked and still, its face hidden by a hood. Jack froze, but the figure spoke in a voice that echoed in his bones. "Why have you come here, traveler? This is hallowed ground for the lost." Jack didn't know what to say, only that he wanted out of this place. The figure raised a hand, and the candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like specters. "Leave now, before it follows you back to your world," it said. Jack turned and ran back to his car, heart pounding as the fog swallowed the ruins once more. Jack didn't know how long he drove. Time seemed to lose all meaning out there in the fog. The road twisted in ways it shouldn't, looping back on itself, leading him past the same landmarks over and over until he was sure he was trapped in some kind of maze. His headlights caught that rusted sign again. "Welcome to Gray Pines." And he cursed, slammed his hand against the wheel. Then just as suddenly as it had come, the fog began to lift, revealing the landscape once more. But what he saw made his blood run cold. The diner stood ahead exactly as he'd left it. Neon sign, flickering window, cracked Mustang's clock, showing the same time it had hours ago. Jack pulled in, heart pounding, stepped out and found the stranger still at the counter. Marge still wiping down the same spot like no time had passed at all. The stranger looked up, gave him a knowing grin, and slid the 50 back into his pocket. "Told you," he said. And Jack didn't argue because he couldn't explain what had happened or how he'd ended up right back where he started. All he could do was sit down, order another coffee, and try to shake the feeling that he'd crossed into a place he was never meant to see, a place that might still be watching, waiting for him to try again. And somewhere out there beyond the broken neon and the cracked highway, something moved in the dark, unseen but not gone.